Some houses don't wait for you to believe in the paranormal. They introduce themselves the moment you step through the door, quietly observing, silently judging, and then slowly revealing the parts of themselves that should have stayed hidden. In Missouri, one father thought he had finally found a peaceful place to rebuild his life, a home where his children could feel safe again. What he didn't know was that the house had been waiting for them, waiting with whispers buried in the walls, shadows that moved with intention, and a darkness that didn't just want attention, it wanted them gone. Stephen LaChance believed he had finally found the perfect place for a new beginning when he arrived at the quiet Missouri neighborhood on Winston Street. The white two-story rental home looked welcoming, with its wide porch and sunlight streaming through its windows. As a single father raising 3 kids, he felt this was exactly the kind of peaceful environment they needed. When the landlord offered the keys without hesitation and mentioned that families never stayed long, Stephen assumed it was just small-town turnover, nothing more. The moment they stepped inside, though, something felt slightly off. The air carried a heaviness that didn't match the bright rooms. Stephen tried to push aside the unease, but his youngest clung to him tightly and whispered that a man was standing at the top of the stairs, watching them. Stephen saw nothing and forced a smile, telling her it was only her imagination. The first week passed quietly, but a subtle tension hovered around the house. Small things began happening that Stephen tried to rationalize. Cabinets opened on their own, footsteps echoed from upstairs when everyone was downstairs, and cold spots drifted through rooms like invisible patches of winter air. One early morning, Stephen was jolted awake by a scream so loud and raw that he sprinted room to room, expecting to find one of his children hurt. But each child slept peacefully. The next morning, the scream returned at the same time, rattling the walls, unmistakably real, yet impossible to trace. The house didn't stop there. Picture frames fell as if pushed from the walls. Lights flickered unpredictably, even after Stephen replaced bulbs and checked wiring. The children grew restless and uneasy, often refusing to enter their bedrooms unless Stephen accompanied them. One night, while putting away laundry, Stephen felt a cold rush sweep directly behind him, so sharp and sudden it made him gasp. When he turned, no one was there, yet the sensation lingered as though someone stood inches away. The children began gathering in the hallway at night, huddled together, wide-eyed and trembling. When Stephen asked them what frightened them so badly, his middle child whispered that the house didn't want them living there. Later that evening, Stephen discovered deep, claw-like scratches on the hallway wall near the children's rooms. None of the kids had made them, and the markings looked fresh, jagged, and deliberate. The uneasy feeling deepened. The heaviness in the air felt like a warning. The voice of the landlord echoed in Stephen's mind. Families don't stay long. And for the first time, he began to understand why. The house wasn't just old. It wasn't just settling or creaking or full of drafts. It was watching them. And something inside it had just started to wake up. Stephen didn't want to admit that something was wrong, but the house was making it harder every day to pretend everything was normal. The moment he walked in after work one afternoon, he noticed the kids huddled together on the living room floor, whispering and glancing nervously toward the vent near the wall. When he asked what was going on, his daughter pointed with a shaking hand and told him that someone was talking inside the vent. At first, Stephen thought maybe it was just wind or the sound of old metal shifting, but when he put his ear to the grate, he heard something he could never fully explain. Faint whispers, low and raspy, drifting up from the darkness like 2 voices speaking just below the surface. They weren't loud enough to make out words, but they were unmistakably human in tone. Stephen immediately pulled back, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what he had just heard. He told the kids it was probably air pressure or plumbing, but even he didn't believe a single word of what he was saying. That night, the house felt different, heavier somehow, like someone had draped a thick blanket over his shoulders. After the kids were asleep, he walked room by room, checking vents, tapping on walls, searching for anything that could explain the whispering. But the entire house felt unnaturally still, as if it were holding its breath. When he reached the upstairs hallway, the floor beneath his feet vibrated gently, like a distant engine humming deep underground. Stephen froze. The hallway lights flickered once, dimmed, and then went completely out, plunging him into darkness. Before he could reach for the switch, he heard it, the slow, wet sound of breathing coming from the far end of the hall. Not the light, rhythmic breathing of a person asleep. This was deeper, strained, almost animal-like. When the lights flickered back on, the hallway was empty, but Stephen felt the presence even after it disappeared. The next morning, things escalated. Stephen came downstairs to find the front door wide open, even though he knew he had locked it the night before. Muddy footprints crossed the entryway floor, and at first he thought maybe an animal had gotten inside. But the prints were strangely shaped, too long at the toes, too narrow at the heel, almost like someone had taken a human footprint and stretched it into something unnatural. Police checked the area, but there were no prints outside leading to or from the house. Nothing to indicate that anyone had actually entered. It was as if the footprints had simply appeared inside the house on their own. Over the next few days, the house grew more aggressive. Doors slammed shut so violently that the walls shook. Objects slid across tables without anyone touching them. Their dog refused to come inside at all, growling and pulling away whenever they tried to bring him through the door. One Saturday morning, Stephen heard a crash upstairs, followed by his children screaming. He raced up the stairs and into his son's room, only to find his oldest child pinned against the wall, his feet dangling slightly above the floor, as if lifted by an invisible grip. The boy clawed at his throat, choking, his face red and contorted in terror. Stephen lunged forward and grabbed him, pulling him away from the wall, and the moment he did, the invisible hold snapped. His son collapsed into Stephen's arms, sobbing and gasping for air. That incident shattered whatever hope Stephen had left of finding a rational explanation. His youngest refused to sleep in her room that night. She clung to him and cried that the man in the house was angry because they weren't listening. Stephen wanted to argue, to comfort her with the promise that nothing bad would happen. But even as he opened his mouth, he felt something cold move through the hallway behind him, brushing past like a warning. The house wasn't creaking or settling. It wasn't haunted by random sounds or shadows. Something intelligent was inside, something aware, and now it had made its intentions brutally clear. It didn't just want their attention, it wanted control. Stephen knew he couldn't keep pretending things would get better on their own. Every night the house felt more alive, like it was studying them, adjusting, learning what frightened them most. The air grew colder, not in a normal winter draft kind of way, but in sudden waves, like something passed through the room and drained all warmth out of the air. One evening, after the kids finally fell asleep on the couch, afraid to be alone, Stephen heard a slow scraping sound coming from beneath the floor. It was steady and deliberate, like nails dragging across wood at a slow, almost curious pace. He followed the sound to the basement door and felt a jolt of fear as he realized it was coming from directly underneath him. The scraping stopped the moment he touched the doorknob, almost as if whatever was down there knew he was listening. He swallowed hard, grabbed a flashlight, and forced himself to open the door. The stairs creaked under his weight as he descended, and with each step the air grew thicker, heavier, making it harder to breathe. When his feet touched the cement floor, the flashlight flickered, dimmed, and then steadied just enough to reveal the cluttered basement around him. He moved slowly, sweeping the beam across dusty boxes and old furniture until it landed on the far wall where a large patch of cement had crumbled away. The hole looked fresh and jagged, as if something had broken through from the other side. Stephen crouched down to inspect it and felt a sudden rush of cold air blowing from deep inside the opening, far too cold to be coming from the ground. Before he could lean in closer, a sound rose from the darkness inside the hole, a low, trembling moan that made his blood run cold. It wasn't human, but it wasn't an animal either. It was something in between, something that didn't belong in a place built by people. Stephen stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight, and scrambled up the stairs, slamming the door behind him. He pressed his back to it, heart racing, and for a moment he thought he heard something touch the other side of the door, a single, slow tap like a finger testing the wood. The next morning, he tried to act normal for the kids' sake, but the moment he walked into the kitchen, he froze. Every cabinet was wide open, every drawer pulled out, and on the kitchen table, someone had carved a single word into the wood: below. Stephen didn't know if it was a warning or a threat, but the children hadn't woken up before him, and there was no way either of them could have carved letters that deep into solid wood. He closed the cabinets, pushed the drawers back in, and tried to quiet the panic rising in his chest, but the house made that impossible. Throughout the day, small things kept happening that made it clear the presence was growing stronger. Lights snapped on and off in rapid bursts as if something was pacing from room to room. The temperature dropped so sharply that Stephen could see his own breath in the middle of the living room. His daughter complained that something kept touching her hair, gently tugging it like a child desperate for attention. By nightfall, Stephen knew he had to confront whatever was in the basement. He couldn't let his children sleep another night in a house where something was lurking beneath their feet. Armed with a crowbar and a lantern, he opened the basement door again, but this time the darkness felt different. It was thicker, almost pulsing, like a living thing waiting for him. He forced himself down the stairs and walked straight toward the hole in the wall. The air coming from it was ice cold, and the lantern light barely reached inside. When he knelt and leaned closer, he saw something that made his breath catch. Deep inside the hole, two pale shapes shifted in the dark, like eyes sliding open after a long sleep. They blinked once, slowly, and fixed on him with an intelligence that felt ancient and hungry. Stephen stumbled back, but before he could turn, a voice drifted out of the hole in a soft, broken whisper that didn't sound fully formed, as if the thing was still learning how to speak. "We're not finished." Stephen ran up the stairs, slammed the door, and locked it, even though he knew a simple lock wouldn't stop whatever lived down there. The house had revealed its secret, and now it wanted him to open the rest of it. Stephen barely slept that night, drifting in and out of shallow dreams that felt more like warnings than rest. Every time his eyes closed, he saw the same thing, those pale, blinking shapes in the darkness of the basement hole, watching him with a patience that felt deliberate and cruel. When morning finally came, he could tell the house had changed again. It was subtle at first, like the air itself was heavier, thicker, as if the walls were holding their breath. Even the light coming through the windows felt dimmer, as though the sun had decided not to shine too brightly on this place. The kids noticed it too. His son kept glancing toward the basement door, eyes wide and uneasy, while his daughter refused to walk down the hallway alone. They didn't say much, but the fear was there, thick and obvious, and Stephen hated himself for bringing them into this nightmare. By midday, the house began to make new sounds. Not the settling pops and cracks of an old structure, but long, groaning creaks that traveled through the walls like something huge was shifting inside them. Stephen tried to stay calm, but his hands shook as he checked every room, every corner, trying to convince himself that nothing had changed. But things had changed, and the house made sure he knew it. In the upstairs hallway, he found muddy footprints leading from the children's room to the top of the stairs. Small prints, too small for him and too large for the kids. They ended abruptly at the top step, as if the thing had disappeared into thin air. Stephen felt his stomach twist. He cleaned them quickly, not wanting the children to see, but the unease sank deeper into him. The house wasn't just showing itself anymore, it was moving. That evening, while the kids were watching cartoons in the living room, Stephen heard a faint humming sound coming from the basement door. It wasn't mechanical, and it wasn't a voice, but something in between, like a low vibration that carried a sense of intent. He pressed his ear to the wood and felt the faintest tremor rippling through it, as if something on the other side was breathing, slow and heavy. He stepped back, heart racing, and that was when the lights flickered. Every lamp, every bulb, flashing rapidly in a stuttering rhythm that filled the house with a cold, frantic energy. The TV snapped off and the kids screamed, running to him. The lights flickered again, then died completely, plunging the house into a darkness so immediate and complete, it felt like it swallowed their voices. Stephen grabbed the lantern he kept near the kitchen and lit it with shaking hands. Its dim glow barely cut through the thick darkness, and the air felt freezing again, sharp enough to sting their skin. The humming grew louder, spreading through the floor, vibrating under their feet. Stephen held the kids close, whispering that everything would be fine, even though he didn't believe it. Then the basement door creaked. It didn't fly open or slam or rattle. It moved slowly, deliberately, as if someone were pushing it with a gentle, careful hand. A thin sliver of darkness formed in the gap, and the humming grew almost melodic, rising and falling like something trying to communicate. Stephen backed away with the kids, but the lantern flickered, dimmed, and then brightened again just enough for him to see movement in that darkness. Not a shape, not a figure, but something shifting low to the ground, crawling with slow, unnatural precision. His daughter whimpered and buried her face in his shirt. His son grabbed his arm so tightly his fingers went numb. Stephen forced himself to stay still, to watch, to understand what was happening, but the thing never fully emerged. It stayed half-hidden, its pale eyes blinking just beyond the reach of the lantern glow, as if it was waiting for Stephen to step closer. He didn't. He backed toward the front door, moving the kids behind him, but as soon as he touched the doorknob, the humming stopped. The basement door slammed shut with a crack so loud it echoed through the entire house, and the lantern went out, leaving them in total darkness. For several seconds, no one moved. Then the lights snapped back on, the temperature rose, and the house went silent, almost peaceful, like nothing had happened at all. But something had happened, something important, something the house wanted them to understand. It wasn't trying to scare them randomly. It was waking up. It wanted them to know it was aware of them, watching them, waiting for the moment when they would finally stop resisting and start listening. And Stephen, holding his trembling children in his arms, realized something terrifying. Whatever was in the basement wasn't trapped. It was choosing to stay down there. For now. Stephen didn't know how much more the children could take, and truthfully, he didn't know how much more he could take either. The house had crossed a line, the kind of line that meant whatever lived inside it no longer cared about subtle warnings or quiet intimidation. It wanted control, it wanted fear, and now it wanted them isolated. The next morning, he tried to get the kids ready to leave, stuffing clothes into a duffel bag as fast as he could, but the house fought back in ways he never could have imagined. Every time he reached the front door, the doorknob burned hot enough to blister his skin. When he went for the back door, it refused to unlock, the deadbolt twisting itself tight as if someone stronger than him was turning it from the inside. Even the windows sealed, their latches sliding shut with that echoed through the silent rooms. Stephen felt something tighten in his chest, a rising dread that made his hands shake. The house wasn't going to let them go. Not easily. Not peacefully. As he backed away from the back door, he heard footsteps upstairs, heavy ones, too heavy to belong to either child. They moved from room to room with slow, dragging thuds, pausing every few steps like the thing was listening for them. Stephen signaled the kids to stay quiet as he crept up the stairs, each step feeling like it could give him away. The hallway at the top was colder than the rest of the house, cold enough that the air came out of his mouth in visible clouds. He heard the footsteps again and followed the sound toward his bedroom. The door was slightly open, and he could see the corner of his mattress pushed off the frame, dragging marks on the carpet as if something had been rummaging through the room. Stephen pushed the door open with the edge of his hand and stepped inside. The room was empty, but the window curtains blew inward even though the window was shut tight. The air smelled like dirt, old, damp dirt from somewhere underground. That was when he saw the message on the wall, not scratched, not carved, written, in long, shaky strokes that dripped down the paint. Stay with us. Stephen stumbled backward and nearly tripped over the edge of the bed. He wanted to scream, but nothing came out. The house wasn't hinting anymore. It was asking, begging, demanding. He rushed back downstairs and grabbed the kids, telling them to stay close no matter what. He didn't have a plan, only a single desperate thought repeating in his mind. Get out, get out, get out. He didn't care how. If he had to break a window, he'd break a window. If he had to rip the door off its hinges, he'd do it. But when he reached the living room, every lamp shattered at once. The bulbs exploded in violent pops that sent glass flying across the furniture. The kids screamed and covered their faces as the house sank into darkness again. The humming started up instantly, louder than ever, vibrating through the floors and walls until the whole house felt like it was pulsing with a heartbeat. The basement door creaked open on its own, slowly, deliberately, the same way it had before, but this time, something stepped out. Stephen couldn't see it fully, not with the flickering streetlights outside barely touching the room, but he saw enough to freeze his blood. Something tall, something thin, something that moved like its joints weren't connected the way a human should be. It stood at the edge of the doorway, watching them with those pale, blinking eyes that he had seen in the basement hole. When it spoke, its voice was different now, stronger, clearer, like it had learned how to mimic a human well enough to push the words out. Don't leave us. Stephen felt the kids grip his arms tighter, trembling uncontrollably. He stepped backward, keeping them close, forcing himself between them and the thing. His breathing was sharp and uneven, but something inside him snapped into place. A kind of desperate courage, the kind you only get when you realize no one is coming to save you. He grabbed the nearest object he could find, a metal fireplace poker, and swung it at the front window. The glass cracked but didn't break. He swung again, harder this time, yelling for the kids to stay behind him. The thing stepped forward, its movements jerky and unnatural, its head tilting with a slow, curious motion like it couldn't understand why he wasn't obeying. The third swing shattered the window, cold air rushing inside, carrying a sense of freedom so sharp it made tears spill from Stephen's eyes. He lifted each kid through the opening as fast as he could, telling them to run and not look back. When it was his turn, he felt something grip his shoulder. Not a hand, something colder, something with too many joints. Stephen tore himself free, scraping his arm on the glass as he climbed out. For days after escaping the house, Stephen kept expecting things to feel normal again. He checked into a small motel with the kids, a place crowded enough that he hoped whatever followed them wouldn't dare show itself. But the first night there, he woke to the familiar sound of humming sliding beneath the floorboards, like a vibration that didn't belong to the building. The kids heard it too. His daughter crawled into his bed, shaking, telling him she had dreamed of pale eyes watching her from the motel closet. Stephen opened the door slowly, expecting to find nothing, but the moment he touched the doorknob, it felt ice cold. Colder than anything in the motel should have been. He told the kids it was just the air conditioning, but even he didn't believe himself. The next morning they moved again, this time staying with a friend. But the haunting didn't stay behind. Small things followed them wherever they went. Lights flickered in rooms they hadn't entered yet. Toys moved from one side of the house to the other without a sound. His son woke screaming in the middle of the night, swearing something had whispered his name right next to his face. Stephen tried everything. He burned sage, he prayed, he begged. But each place they stayed grew colder, heavier, like the presence from the house was slowly stretching itself across every space they tried to hide in. It wasn't violent now, not like it had been in the house, but it was there, waiting, patient as ever. One night, weeks after the escape, Stephen drove past the old house on a desperate impulse. Maybe he thought he could end this by seeing it again, by facing whatever had started all of this. The house looked the same as the night he left it, dark windows staring blankly into the street, the shattered front windows still unrepaired. But something was different too. The air around it felt almost alive, shimmering with a pressure that made his chest feel tight. And then he saw them, pale eyes in the upstairs window, watching, blinking slowly. Not angry, not desperate, just waiting. When he pulled away, he saw the same pale glow in his rearview mirror, far behind him. Like the house itself was following him with its gaze. He didn't go back again. Some places aren't meant to be understood. Some homes aren't meant to shelter families. And some hauntings don't disappear just because you walk away from where they started. Stephen eventually moved far from Missouri, but he admitted something he rarely told anyone. The humming still comes back sometimes, soft at first, almost curious, just enough to remind him that the connection was never broken. He knows the presence is still out there, patient and quiet, waiting for the moment he stops looking over his shoulder, waiting for the night he lets his guard down. And deep down, in a place he tries to ignore, Stephen fears one thing above all. The house didn't want them to stay. It wanted to follow.